Contemporary Satanic Panic by Gabrielle Key. Satanism is a relatively modern religion made up of several small denominations alongside one main branch. Local denominations are often known as grottos, pylons, or temples. Whilst there were solo practitioners as early as the 1950s, there was no official satanic religion until the mid-60s when Anton LaVey created the Church of Satan, which to this day is the largest tradition within religious Satanism. Often believed to have been founded on Walpurgisnacht 1966, it was not until the next year when LaVey actually founded his church. Walpurgisnacht is a traditional German celebration when witches and warlocks supposedly gathered at locations throughout the Harz Mountains on the eve of St. Walburg's Day, before flying to Brocken on goats and broomsticks, bringing spring with them. To many people, the images summoned upon the mention of Satanism are those of devil worship, witchcraft, and rituals, as well as memories of several highly publicised accusations of animal and child abuse. However, this is not how Satanists view themselves. In October 2014, the director of the Satanic Temple of San Antonio, Texas, said, "Most people have a misconception of what Satanism is, especially what our form of Satanism is, because we endorse things like compassion and empathy, and generally speaking, people think Satanists are full of hate and worshipping the devil. We use the symbol of Satan as archetypal imagery. It represents a symbol of mankind, the indomitable spirit of mankind, and it represents the symbol of all man from oppression." He also made a point to note their active promotion of human rights issues such as women's health and same-sex marriage. Many of these stereotypical ideas of Satanism can be traced back to literature promoted by conservative Christian bookstores. One novel which had a huge impact on the public's perception of Satanism was Michelle Remembers, which was published in 1980. Michelle Remembers detailed the supposed memories of a young girl who had been sexually and physically abused by an underground satanic group. Whilst this novel was later proven to be a work of fiction, it had already succeeded in causing an outbreak of satanic panic, with many people suddenly convinced in the very real and imminent danger of satanic ritual abuse. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that this panic would begin to subside due to the lack of evidence. In actual fact, Satanists do not worship Satan as a deity. They instead view him as a principle. Instead of worshipping a god or goddess, the focus is placed upon the individual and their own power and authority within their own life. As Vexen Crabtree, former minister of the now-closed London Satanists group, said, "Satanism is Satanism, not due to our worship of any deity, but for the philosophy that we stand for. We recognise ourselves as gods, and we hold our own perspective on life as holy, and revere our own experiences as the only truth we can ever know. Satanism is the utter rejection of the spiritual way of theistic religions, and the honest admittance that we are just animals who evolve as any other complex system." Satanism first burst into the public conscience in the mid-1960s, with interest in the occult reaching such heights in the early 70s that a Times cover was dedicated to the topic, with a large section of the article focusing on Satanism. There was an increase in literature discussing Satanism, notably Anton LaVey's 1969 Satanic Bible. Unfortunately, much of the literature was based on whispers, hearsay, and misconstrued ideas of Satanism. Perhaps most famous was the previously mentioned Michelle Remembers by Lawrence Pastor. This book documents the supposed repressed memories of an adult Michelle Smith, who underwent hypnosis therapy with Pastor. According to the book, as a child, Smith was subject to many different horrors at the hand of an underground Satanist group, involving rape, murder, kidnap, and more, culminating in an 81-day straight mega ritual where Satan himself was supposedly summoned. Michelle Remembers sent fear into the hearts of parents across North America, where the abduction and consequent torture and abuse of their children suddenly seemed a very real threat. Whilst some news outlets did not publicise Smith and Pastor's story as concrete truth due to the lack of evidence, many news outlets did, and within 3 years, hundreds of stories of satanic ritual abuse had made their way into the public domain. One of the most notorious cases to come out of the satanic ritual abuse panic was the case of the McMartin preschool, which resulted in a $15 million trial, still to this day the most expensive state criminal trial ever. After an accusation was made by the ex-wife of one of the teachers at McMartin's preschool that her son had been abused at the family-run preschool, 7 people were arrested and accused of child abuse. What followed was an investigation and trial which were called farcical, with accusations of manipulative investigation techniques, a lead accuser who was deemed insane at the time of making the initial complaint, and a starting number of 360 supposed victims, which had dropped to 48 by the time the trial ended in 1990. Only 2 of the accused were actually taken to trial, and both were eventually acquitted, but not before Ray Buckey had spent 5 years in jail for a crime he was never actually found guilty for. Years later, many of the children who had been interviewed came forward and revealed that they had been coerced into giving testimony in order to please their parents and those investigating the case. False accusations such as these have been hugely detrimental to a minority religion which has always been at loggerheads with one of the largest major religions in the world, Christianity. With many satanic beliefs being in direct contrast to Christianity. For example, Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek, a key component in Christian belief. Satanists believe there are no other worldly gods or deities, and that we humans are the masters of our own destiny. In fact, one of the 9 satanic statements is that Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept the church in business for so many years. Something which does not seem quite so far-fetched, when a simple Google search for Christians against Satanism provides hundreds of links to protests, campaigns, books, interviews, and more. Somewhat ironically, despite people's belief that Satanists are violent and stuck in the dark ages of magic and witchcraft, many comparisons have been made between Satanism and Christianity, where it is in fact the Christian God who is depicted as archaic and brutal, whereas the followers of Satan are much more liberal and accepting of individuals and their rights. For example, when it comes to same-sex relationships or the treatment of women, especially in terms of sexual violence. In these instances, it is very clear that the satanic rules were written in a much more modern time, and so has a more current approach to life.